Hi everyone, I'm Danny from Orchid Nature. Since I had a few requests on making a video dedicated only to orchid fertilizers, I will try today to give you all the basic knowledge you should have in order to choose a fertilizer that is appropriate for your orchids. There are many different opinions out there, and it's a good thing because there is no one single way of growing orchids, and people experimenting different things only leads to a proper understanding of orchids. So in short, orchid fertilizers are food for our plants. Like all living things on this planet, orchids need fuel to fuel their energy and growth. In nature, this food is provided by natural processes that we cannot obtain in our homes, so we are just trying to mimic what type of food they would receive in nature. Now, to understand where this food comes from, we need to think about how orchids grow. Most orchids are epiphytes. This means they don't grow in soil, but attached to trees or rocks in some cases. This way of living provides less food for orchids. This is why they grow so slow compared to other plants that grow in soil. However, the advantage is that orchids can survive better if there is a lack of nutrients or if they just go through a period of drought. They consume less energy by growing slower and need less food to properly develop. For this reason, orchid fertilizers are specifically created for them. They have lower concentrations of nutrients than all-purpose fertilizers, and we should only use these types of fertilizers. Now imagine you have been a vegetarian for a few years, and all of a sudden you have a high-protein meal, like a steak or something like that. Your body is not used to this level of protein, and you might have a very bad reaction to it. It's the same with orchids. They are not used to high levels of nutrients, so if they receive a big meal all at once, they might get burnt roots and not feel so well. Food in nature comes from decomposing organic material, like dead leaves and animal droppings. By decomposition, nitrogen along with some other chemicals are released, and they go through natural transformations and ultimately reach the orchid's roots, when water runs down the tree's bark or rocks. The main chemical element in an orchid's diet is nitrogen, symbolized by the letter N. All decomposing organic material releases nitrogen, and through natural processes, nitrogen transforms in a more stable formula, which can be ammonia, nitrate, nitrate, and some other things. Plants cannot consume nitrogen in its single form, but they will gladly accept formulas like the ones I just mentioned. There are several beliefs whether orchids can consume ammonia, and this is where you can make your own decision based on the information available on the internet. My personal belief, based on growing aquatic plants and some other research, is that they will consume nitrogen in the form of nitrate better. This is why I like to choose a fertilizer that contains nitrate rather than ammonia or uric acid. Another good thing is that the same amount of nitrate is far less dangerous and toxic than that of ammonia. So I believe I am much safer from root burns with a nitrate-based fertilizer. Other main elements that orchids use in greater quantities are phosphorus and potassium, symbolized by the letters P and K. Of course, in an orchid fertilizer, you will find them in a more stable formula. On a bottle of fertilizer, you can see these elements expressed by the letters N, P, and K in some cases, and their respective numbers, which will depend on the fertilizer. They represent the quantity of these elements contained in the bottle of fertilizer. All orchid fertilizers contain these substances that form the main course for our pretty orchids. In general, fertilizers divide in two categories: those that have higher nitrogen content and those that have a lower nitrogen content compared to the other elements, as you can see here. High nitrogen fertilizers improve root and foliage production and help the orchid grow, while low nitrogen fertilizers can help the orchid cope with blooming better. If you are not sure what type of fertilizer you should use just yet, you can go for a balanced fertilizer that contains the same amount of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, for example, a 10-10-10. I personally alternate these fertilizers depending on what my orchid is doing. If she is in growing mode, I will use the high nitrogen fertilizer, and if she's blooming or is producing a flower spike, I will use the orchid bloom booster. Apart from these main elements, orchids will benefit from trace elements as well, like iron, calcium, magnesium, and a few others that contribute to the well-being of the orchid. I always like to go for a fertilizer that contains all these trace elements because they do contribute to an orchid's health, even though they are not consumed in large quantities, like the nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. Always follow the directions provided on the label of your fertilizer and never feed more than the recommendations. Like I said earlier, orchids don't like to be overwhelmed with a high-protein meal. I personally like to use half the amount recommended because I use tap water, which already has a small quantity of minerals, and I really don't want to over-fertilize. When using rainwater though, you are safe to use the full dosage, as rainwater is very poor in minerals. Orchid fertilizers are added to the water you intend to water your orchids with, so follow the instructions. Some fertilizers will provide you with a sort of a spoon, a measurement spoon, but some will require you to find a teaspoon or a tablespoon. Place the amount recommended of fertilizer in your teaspoon or tablespoon, depending on recommendations, and then mix it with the water you want to use with your orchids. Now, some people believe that wetting the media prior to adding fertilized water is beneficial and can limit root burns. I don't usually do this and I never had any trouble, but if you just feel safer by wetting the orchid media first, then by all means do so. The important thing is for you to be comfortable with what you're doing. I personally fertilize twice a month, and in between adding fertilized water, I water my orchids with plain water to dissolve and remove any salt buildups that might have accumulated because of the fertilizer. I find this is a good routine to follow and can keep you safer from root burns. Again, you can choose your own routine based on how you think it's best for your orchids and yourself. A while ago, there was the belief that orchids planted in bark media needed a higher nitrogen fertilizer. The belief was that by decomposition, microorganisms would feed on the nitrogen and starve the orchid. But this is a very false assumption, and I'm very happy that the American Orchid Society is starting to support quite the opposite. Remember I told you in the beginning that by decomposition, nitrogen is released, not consumed? There is your explanation. Orchids will not be starved, but quite the opposite. In time, decomposition can actually build up nitrogen in dangerous toxic form, like ammonia, which can lead to root burns. You adding high levels of nitrogen through fertilizers can only make things worse. Adding an ammonia or uric acid-based fertilizer is the worst thing you can do for a broken down media. At least this is what I think. And these are the basic ideas you should have to better choose a fertilizer that suits you. Choosing a specific brand of fertilizers will depend on your territory and the availability of this product in your region, so I think it is best to first understand the basics of how orchid food works, and then try to find a brand that will suit you. There are many good and respected brands out there, so I have added a link in the description with the ones I know about so you can further get informed on them. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this video, and please let me know in a comment how you like to fertilize your orchids. If I missed anything, just let me know in a comment, and don't be afraid to ask a question. Bottom line is, Mother Nature is a beautiful and perfect thing, and understanding it will only enrich you. So don't forget to subscribe if you like what you see, and visit orchidnature.com for more orchid goodies. Thank you for joining. Bye!